All right. So for Catherine Alexander, sorry you can't be here with us today. So
I'm so sorry, Catherine.
Okay,
I'm kidding.
Carter, I'm not even going to repeat what Carter said to Catherine, but we do miss you, Catherine. So I am asking a lot of you guys reading this book. But if it makes you feel any better, when kids came on Tuesday, they're like, yeah, I so did not read all of this. Okay? So, yeah, okay. So here's the thing. What I would like you to do, and this is what you're doing for posterity, I feel like this was a doable amount of stuff in 2 weeks. But what I need from you is honesty. Oh, it's being recorded. Honesty for posterity. Like, because I was talking to one student who shall remain nameless, and he or she said, yeah, well, I really didn't do much of it the first week. All right. So only you guys know. Did you really put a good effort into it? Or did you like, yeah, I'm taking a 2-week break, so I'm really not going to do that much this week? I appreciate it if you would be honest, because if I'm assigning way more than is humanly possible, if you say, yes, I got it read, but I stopped eating and sleeping, I need to know that. So tell me, talk to me, tell me back. Like, did you spend an hour and a half to 2 hours a day doing work for me over break?
I didn't work as much the first week.
Okay.
And so even then it wasn't like unbearable the second week. And
Okay.
So I feel like if I had worked harder, it would have been fine.
And did you get it all read? Okay. So no, you do not have to, like, I'm not going to beat you. And there's no beatings. But if you did not read it all, why do you think you did not? Is it just like not humanly possible for you? Is it, I really didn't do as much on it as I could have? Was it other things happened in my life and crowded it out, and it wasn't that important to me? I seriously, I'm seriously asking, not to like berate you or anything, just so that I can know for the future.
I had a little bit left.
Okay.
I procrastinated a little.
Okay, so that's what I need to know, Lizzie. That's what I need to know. So for you gentlemen, did you get what? Okay, and why not? Okay, so it was a lot for you to read, and you don't like to read long periods of time at once. Have you ever, is that true for you too? Okay, have you thought about, okay, have you thought about splitting it up into a couple of times? Like, for instance, so this is 2 classes. Remember, this is the equivalent of 2 classes. So, just a second, don't forget it, but I'll forget if I don't keep going. So you could do part of it in the morning and part of it in the afternoon or something like that. Do you know what I mean? And then it wouldn't be so overwhelming in one moment. Like, I read for 40 minutes this morning, and then after lunch I'm just going to put in another 40 minutes and then I'm done for today. Like, do you feel like that might work for you? Okay. We're going to go over all the questions. Don't worry. And I'm going to, so Raymond won't mind me outing him. Raymond came, is like, I don't know what the heck's going on in this book. Like, great. So that's why I'm here. All right? Because when you leave here, you will know. All right? But I gave them a pep talk yesterday, and here's the thing. You guys are all, I read your papers, and I see your comments, and I listen to your comments, and I know your habits at home, more or less, of, reading, even if you don't like to read long periods of time, but the level of stuff that you are exposed to and understand. Like, I know this. But it's like if I were the gym and I came in and I only gave you amounts of exercise or weight that did not challenge you at all. Do you know what I mean? And then you would not get stronger, would you? And so at some point when we're learning, we read things that are above us, and we fail. Like, if I go to the gym, 2 weeks ago I did that workout that my sons did, and it laid me up for 10 days. right? Now, I'm not saying work your brain so hard that they have to, you have to get mental help. But do you see what I mean? I tried to do something a little beyond me because I wanted to get stronger. And so I read things regularly that are too hard for me. And yes, there are plenty of things that are too hard for me. Some philosophers are really, Aristotle is hard. We're going to read some Aristotle together, but not like this. Not, little Aristotle. It's hard. But if I try, I get better. So anyway, that's my pep talk to say, you can do it. Given that, I am going to, when you leave here, we're going to read the next 2 books. Book 5 is much shorter, all right? But book 4, I'm going to give you the overview, and you're going to know what book 4 is about before you leave here. I'm going to tell you sections that you can leave out, all right? If my desire would be you read the whole thing. So if you're like Carter and you're like, yeah, if I divide it up and so I say I need to read X number of pages by next week. So if I divide that by however many, 4 days or 5 days, however many days I want to read, I need to read this many pages per day, and I can do that. That's fine. But if it's difficult, I'm going to guide you towards the sections that will be more valuable for you to read, okay? Is that a deal? Deal? But then if you read that, and it's like, oh, that was pretty easy. I've got an extra day. Why don't you read some of the parts that you left out? Just for kicks, all right? I'm going to do that. You probably noticed that book 2 is everything you ever even didn't think about asking about Egypt. If you read any of book 2, it's like, what? Yes. It just went on. Why does the Nile flood? And how did they build these pyramids? And all that. And hippopotamuses have manes like a horse. Like, no, they don't. And winged serpents and the phoenix. And I went, and the priests told me this, and they showed me statues of all their kings in the past. And they say that, the earliest languages is Phoenician because they put those kids in a room, and they wouldn't let anybody talk to them. You say you read parts of it, because I hear you're nodding. And you're like, what am I reading? What does this have to do with anything, Mr. Herodotus? And some of it's just cool stuff. But there is an overall pattern to what he's doing. So we're going to talk about that. But the first thing I want to do is talk about, I need papers from you.
If I had to say, it would be the lack of motivation comes from you don't know. There's points in the books where you can stop because he moves on to the next.
Yes.
But you don't know where that is.
You do not know where that is. I gotcha. Yes. It is very hard to read something that you don't know. You need a stopping place, but you're not sure where that stopping place is going to be.
Because if I stop in the middle, I
Thank you, sir.
remember what I was
Yeah, but I'm
reading.
like, what's going on?
All right. Are we good? Oh, no, I don't have yours yet. So I was going to say I have 3 papers and 4 students. I have done much math in a while, Mark, but I figured out that there's one missing. Thank you. What I'd like you to do is grab your reading guide thingamabobs, and I'm going to have you do a writing exercise that I haven't had students ever do before. Yay.
We're always your
I know, because I'm always changing things. It's always, I could do this better. This would be even more awesome. So every time I do it, I'm changing. So in the late Roman world and into the Middle Ages, there were set exercises that people did to help them be better, in this case, usually better speakers, but better writers. So rhetoric, you're probably familiar with the term rhetoric and the art of expressing yourself, okay? And they had a series of exercises they took students through, and they were called by the funny name of the progymnasmata. Progymnasmata. And I think it's like, so I learned this in my Greek. Gymnazo means exercise. So gymnasium, the place where you exercise. And so this exercises your ability to think and your ability to express yourself and your ability to come up with ideas. Would you agree, and it's okay if you would not, that part of the problem when we sit down to write something is thinking of what to say? obviously, if I asked you to write about your favorite topic, Mark, what's your favorite thing to do? What do you,
I don't know.
do you have a hobby? Like, is there something, or like something you're particularly interested in? Eating food? Okay, so this is fine. I share this hobby, Mark.
Too, but
As you say, as you put food in your mouth. So if I asked you to write about different restaurants and different types of food that you like and the seasonings that you like, maybe if you're into it that much, and whether lemonade goes well with this, like you probably, I can think of lots of information. Like, I've been to this restaurant and this is good and that's good. And it's just simply because you have a lot of information in your head about it. So coming up with the information, getting it out of our heads is difficult. That's why we were looking at those common topics. Anyway, that's what the progymnasmata does. It's not so I can present this finished paper that we're going to etch in stone and hand down to posterity. It's gymnasmata, okay, it's exercise for your brain to get ideas. So one of the progymnasmata exercises is called a kreia. And a kreia, which you will see how it's spelled in a minute, is basically a tribute to a wise saying. So you could write a kreia to a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, all right? You could say, I don't even know where that comes from. I don't know who said this saying. But you could say why that person is wise, that they said that, and examples of why it's wise and how it can be applied and that sort of thing. And it just makes you generate ideas. So you're going to write a kreia for me. So first of all, turn in your reading guide to page 41. And there I have for you the kreia. And I have the parts of the kreia, and then I have an example. Aphthonius, I have no idea who Aphthonius is, except that he's a teacher of rhetoric from late Roman, early medieval times, and he wrote a bunch of examples of these for students. So I'm going to actually, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to name the part, then I'm going to read the example so you see what it sounds like, okay? Part number 1, praise for the author of the wise saying. Here's from Athenians. Isocrates said that the root of education is bitter, its fruit sweet. That's the saying. The root of education is bitter, but its fruit is sweet. It is right to admire Isocrates for his art, for he gave it a most glorious name and proved its greatness by his practice of it. He made the art famous. He did not owe his fame to it. To go through the benefits he conferred on human life by giving laws to kings and advice to individuals would be too long. I speak only of his wise saying on education. So you see part 1. Isocrates said this, and Isocrates is awesome. Praise for the author. Part 2. Paraphrase the saying. Do you know what it means to paraphrase?
Like if you read the Bible, but you don't know what the verses are explicitly what they say, and you're like,
You just say the name.
You say it in your own words. That's exactly what paraphrase is. Say it again in your own words. The next section is say it again in your own words. The lover of education, he says, labors at first, but those labors end in profit. That was his wise saying, and we shall show our admiration in what follows. So, the root of education is bitter, its fruit sweet. He paraphrased it. If you're being educated, the lover of education, you work hard at first, but then you get profit from it later. All right, next section, causes or reasons for the saying. This is why he said this. And this part should make you feel good about your education. The lovers of education are enrolled with the leaders of education, whom it is fearful to approach, though to desert them is foolish. Fear always waits on boys, both when they are present and in anticipation. Why? Because your teachers will beat you in this time if you don't learn your lesson properly. This is why they fear. All right. From teachers, the attendants take over. You know, the person who takes you to and from school. fearful to behold, more fearful when inflicting punishment. Fear precedes the experience, and punishment follows on fear. What the boys do wrong, they punish. What the boys do well, they take as a matter of course. Doesn't that seem like life? What you do poorly, you get punished for, but if you do it right, no one says, yay, good job. Fathers are harsher than attendants, examining their ways, telling them to make progress, viewing the marketplace with suspicion. And if punishment is needed, they take no account of human nature. But by these experiences, the boy, when he reaches adulthood, is crowned with virtue. All those thrashings, all those beatings, they bear fruit in the end. They're bitter while they're happening, but they turn you into the sort of person you were supposed to be. Do you see how all this is explaining the reason for the saying? Why would we say that the root of education is bitter? Because it stunk to be a school boy. Sorry, Lizzie, but it was pretty much boys. In, the Roman world, because they beat you here and they beat you there and they beat you when you don't decline your Latin noun right, and they beat you all over the place, okay? But later you're smart, right? And you know how to make yourself do stuff. So that's the reasons for the saying. Now, the next part, a contrast, it's actually part of that same paragraph. But if someone, because he fears these things, flees from his teachers, absconds from his parents, avoids his attendants, he is utterly deprived of eloquence. Along with his fear, he has set aside eloquence. So contrast, if you don't submit to that bitter root, you end up an idiot when you grow up. That was a paraphrase. All these things swayed Isocrates' judgment when he called the root of education bitter. All right, next section, a comparison. Is it like anything else? For just as those who work the land laboriously sow the seed in the earth and gather the crops with greater joy, in the same way those who strive for education by their toil acquire subsequent renown. Farmers have a rough time in the spring. You got to work really hard to get the fields ready and plant, and then you got to watch over it, and then you got to harvest it. But once it's harvested, you have a party, right? The root of the work is bitter, but the fruit is sweet. Okay, next section, an example. His example is going to be a man named Demosthenes. Some of you might remember Demosthenes. Maybe Dominic would. Do you remember he was a Greek orator? He's the guy who filled his mouth with rocks to learn to speak better. Do either of you remember this? He stuttered. He wanted to be a public speaker. He wanted to be a great orator, but he stunk at it. So his chest was really weak. He didn't have a very projecting voice. So he used to go to the seashore and talk really loud so that he could talk louder than the noise of the waves to train his voice to be loud. And you stage people know projecting, right? You have to project from the stage. And then to speak clearly, he put rocks in his mouth. And he tried to learn to speak as clearly as he could with the rocks, and so when he took them out, obviously, he could speak even more clearly. Does this ring a bell at all? You don't remember him? Oh, poor Demosthenes. We've forgotten him. That's okay. Consider Demosthenes' career. The point being is Demosthenes worked really hard to get where he was, right? He did all this stuff to get where he was, which was more devoted to toil than that of any orator, and more glorious than that of any. So great was his commitment that he even deprived his head of its adornment, thinking the best adornment is that from virtue, and he devoted to toil what others to devote to enjoyment. While other people were binge watching, Gilmore Girls and playing video games, Demosthenes was walking around with rocks in his mouth and screaming over the waves. All right? Okay.
I had to explain all the herodotus because I thought I didn't answer any of your questions for a second.
Oh, no, that's next week. You're okay. You're okay. Okay, so that's an example. A testimony. Does anybody say anything that has to do with this? For this reason, one must admire Hesiod, who said that the road to virtue is hard, but the summit is easy, expressing the same wise judgment as Isocrates. For what Hesiod represented as a road, Isocrates called the route. Both disclose the same opinion, though in different words. And then our epilogue, our wrap-up. Those who consider these points must admire Isocrates for his outstandingly wise saying on education. Now, notice a couple of things. It's not very long, is it? What if I don't know very much about the speaker of the saying? Well, I just say what I do know. Like, well, I think it's a wise saying, so he must be wise. Because stupid people don't come up with wise sayings. But I'm actually going to give you one that you are going to know a little bit about the author, okay? And other than that, it's just an exercise in using your imagination. How would I put that saying in my own words? And then put it in your words. Can I think of an example of it? Like why would somebody say that saying? How does life work in such a way that that saying could come in handy? It's just basically you scouring your brain to find ways that the wise saying can apply. Does this all make sense? And it's not going to be very long. It's just not going to be very long. You can divide it up into parts just like Athenians did. It's fine with me. You know what I mean? You don't have to, it doesn't have to be all one paragraph or something. You can divide it up. That's fine. Here's the saying. I would like you to jot this down. I'm not going to actually give you the entire saying, but I'm going to show you where to find it in Herodotus, because we are going to do a saying from Herodotus, and I need, lost. I was holding on to something and I was talking to my husband. Okay, I have to unplug myself. If I can't find it, I will run in there and find it. Okay, so I know it's in book 2. And it's after this. I feel like it's in, okay. It's book 2, so write a 2 and a dot, just anywhere. And then 173, you know that means book 2, paragraph 173, and it's sentence number 3. So you could do another dot and a 3. It would look like this: 2 dot 173 dot 3. Does that make sense? Book 2, paragraph 173, and it's on page 199. And if your book is exactly that way, it's on page 199. And there it was the Egyptian king Amasis, who we are going to talk about. And it's like, I didn't read the part about Amasis. Okay. How am I going to write this paper? Because it's okay. Amasis, when he became king, we're going to talk in a minute about how he became king, was in the habit of getting up early and getting all his work done early in the morning, and then he'd have like a leisurely lunch with friends, and he'd lay around and sort of loaf and drink and visit friends and stuff in the afternoon. And somebody said, well, actually read what they said: "Sire, you are not conducting yourself properly by pursuing worthless pastimes. You ought to be seated solemnly upon your stately throne, transacting affairs throughout the day. That way the Egyptians would know they were being governed by a competent man, and your reputation would improve." You know, because it's hard to respect the king when he's out, you know, at the bar all afternoon with his friends, throwing darts at the dartboard and, you know, throwing back pints of beer. Here's what he said. And this is the saying I'm going to have you do. And it's going to be, you're probably not going to want to write the whole saying. You're probably going to want to just look it up again. Amasis retorted, "When archers need to use their bows, they string them tightly. But when they have finished using them, they relax them. For if a bow remained tightly strung all the time, it would snap and be of no use when someone needed it." And we talked about this, I think, in the Odyssey. You know, archers don't keep the string on their bow all the time, right? You remember the suitors had to string the bow? We do remember that? You bend the bow and flip the string on the notch, and then it's tight and it's ready to shoot. But that's not good for the wood to keep it like that all the time. When you're done, you unstring it and you let it relax. So I hope you see what Amasis is saying. We're like the bow, aren't we? If You read Herodotus all the time because Mrs. Ferguson gives you an ungodly amount of reading to do. And you never relax. You too will be like the bow that is damaged from being overstretched, and then you will not be able to do what you need to do at the proper time. Make sense? Does the saying make sense?
Yeah.
All right?
Yeah.
So, what is funny? I gotta know what's funny.
It made me think of this weird like horror movie thing that my dad showed me. It was like this dude was like insane and he was typing like a book, but like it was one sentence. It was like, if Johnny does like all work and no play, Johnny will be a dull boy. And it was like
Took a whole book and
it was
looked
just
like an
that
actual book,
sentence.
but it was just that sentence over and over.
What is the
again.
name of this?
I don't remember.
This seems familiar to me.
I don't
I have
remember.
no
Okay, all right. I'm sorry, that's nothing to do with our class,
Sorry,
but I
that-
just got curious. So, what you're going to do is just like Athenians did about Isocrates' saying about the root of education, you're going to do Amasis' saying about when you want to use a bow, you string it, but when you're done using it, you relax it. So I do my work and then I relax. Now, question. I don't remember anything about Amasis. How can I praise him? I didn't read that part, Mrs. Ferguson. I'm going to come to your rescue. If I were you, now I'm going to teach you the dirty secrets that students use when they don't get their work done. All right? Because this is also something we need to know. Sometimes we have time to get everything done, and sometimes we have to cut corners. And it's between you, God, and your parents, which one you do. All right? But here's what I do when I have to cut corners. It's like, shoot, I don't remember anything about Amasis. And this crazy teacher, she wants me to praise Amasis. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you what you're going to do. In the back of books, I am sure you are familiar with the concept of an index. You can look things up in the back of a book and in alphabetical order, and it will tell you all sorts of stuff where to find it in the book. So what I'm going to do, because I'm you, see, I'm the student, I didn't read it. I'm sorry, I just didn't read it. I didn't even have a good reason, I just didn't read it. I'm going to look up Amasis in the back. So when I look up Amasis in the index, oh, it's long. This is the section on Amasis in the index. Do you see? But you know what? I want to praise Amasis, right? So I'm just going to scour this for anything that sounds good. Like if he did something good, and then I'm just going to look that part up. So I'm going to look through, okay, boom, boom, boom. Cleverness and tact. Ooh, that's good. It says book 2, paragraph 172. I'm going to read paragraph 172 because it's going to tell me he's clever and tactful. Friendship, daily routine. That's actually the thing that we're writing about. Drinking and jokes. I like this. Foot basin. Melts down to make a golden statue and remind Egyptians of his humble origins. Ooh, being humble is good. I'm going to read that. It's only one paragraph. That can't take me too long to read. Do you see what I'm doing? I'm only looking for stuff that sounds like it's Amasis being described in a good way. And I'm just going to go back and check those portions. I can do that in like 15 minutes. Very good. You got the idea. But I'm probably not going to, monuments built by. That's always, building monuments seems like a good thing to me. But prosperity of Egypt during his reign. I'm trying to find one that seems bad. I don't know. Egyptians become his willing slaves. I don't know. Maybe he's really nice. That could be a good thing for him. Sins Spartans an embroidered breastplate, which is stolen by the Samians. Yeah, don't care. Not going to read that one. But do you see, dies before Cambyses' invasion? Yeah, that's not something I can use. All right, good for him. I praise him because he died before Cambyses. No, don't do that.
Sure, I just can't talk about his
You could. You will have to use your own judgment on that. But do you understand the concept? Okay, so that's what I'd like you to do. If you just say, you know what, I did read about Amasis, but I just don't remember because, hello, Mrs. Ferguson, I read 300 pages of the most weird garbage I've ever read in my life, and I don't remember half of it. It's like, that's okay. Just use the index and look back and find a few good things to say about Amasis. The rest of this comes out of your imagination. You can like, what is that like? We all need to relax. Can I think of an example of someone who worked too hard? What happens when you work too hard and then you have to go to a mental hospital or something and you go on medication? I don't know. But use your imagination for that. Does everyone understand the assignment? So it's not going to be super long. And the only thing you really have to do research for is spend 15 minutes looking up good points on Amasis so you can praise the author of the saying. All right? I would like you to do that for next week. All right? Okay, so let's dig in to this crazy book. It does have a structure. I know it does not seem like it. We're going to go through as many of our questions as we can, okay? So I know you may not have answered many of them. It's okay. We're going to go through them. I'm going to hit the stuff I asked questions on. We're going to hit about 1/20th or 1/50th of what's in this book. And if it makes you feel better, the first time I read this book, I was the same as you guys. Like, what the heck is this? Why can this man not stay on target? I thought this was about the Persians. I don't understand why we're talking about these people.
The only thing that was hard for me was trying to remember like the regions and then the descendants, because he would go from
Yes.
father to son to grandmother.
Yes. And often they have the same names. Have you noticed how many people name their son, and it's like they've got two names in the family? And they just alternate generations. And like, which generation are we on? I just don't know. So it's okay. But the first thing I asked you is, what does Herodotus say is his purpose in writing this book? What's the point?
To help people remember.
Yes. He says, Herodotus of Halicarnassus here presents his research. Remember I told you that the word translated research is historia, which actually means inquiry. I'm just asking questions. This is my inquiring into what happened. So that human events do not fade with time. May the great and wonderful deeds, some brought forth by the Hellenes, others by the barbarians, not go unsung, as well as the causes that led them to make war on each other. I want everyone to remember. And then he starts off, and for Herodotus, are you guys familiar with the concept of the butterfly effect? Do you know what that means? Dominic's yes. Mark's, I don't know. Is it like catching butterflies? Is this entomology? It's the, tell us, Dominic. Okay, Dominic's gonna tell us.
Like it's saying, if you went back in time and you had made the smallest change, you could destroy the timeline. Like even something as small as like the flap of a butterfly wing.
Like, so the concept is maybe a butterfly changes its course in I don't know, Alaska, and it changes something here because the airflow and the atoms are just slightly changed. But Dominic's illustration was really good. If you go back in time, and if you've ever seen a movie about going back in time, it's like, don't change anything because then you won't exist or something. Because, I didn't kill that ant. That ant was supposed to be stepped on, and now it didn't get stepped on, and now that ant built an anthill somewhere, and it caused a car wreck that wasn't supposed to happen. I don't know. I'm being silly. That's why I don't write screenplays for sci-fi movies.
The person that died was your descendant, so you
Yes, yes. So for Herodotus, I feel like this is his view of the world. Like every little thing, every decision made by private people affects great things, which I kind of like, because you read some history books, it's like great wars and world leaders and everything, and you think, but the average person doesn't matter. But for Herodotus, the average person really matters, and things that happened in the past have an effect. So for what event do the Persians blame the Hellenes, which is the Greeks, for hostilities between the two people?
Exactly, sure.
Yes. So he starts out, book 1, by saying, what really happened here is people started kidnapping women. And
I
you know,
think you erased my
somebody,
answer like 3 times.
I know, because you keep going on. It's like, no, that wasn't it. That wasn't it. He goes on and on about. He says, well, you remember Io and Europa, and Io went from Greece and she ended up in Egypt, and then Europa, they say she climbed on that bull's back and it swam out, but really, I think they kidnapped her. And then eventually, Paris steals Helen, and we got all this kidnapping of women going on. And that was the Europe versus Asia, because a European woman got kidnapped by Asians, and then an Asian woman gets kidnapped by Europeans. Yes, Dominic?
I have a question.
Yes.
Is Europe named after Europa?
Yeah, as far as we know. Although I was reading more, I couldn't sleep last night, so I was reading Herodotus for next week, and he was talking about where they got their names. And he actually didn't mention, he did mention Europa, but he didn't seem to think it was true, but I think so. I think that's why we call it that. Because here's big picture number one. Herodotus sees Persians versus Greeks as Asia versus Europe. Like, this is the clash of continents, and it's the clash of cultures. The Asians, and when we say Asia, we think China and Japan, but for them it meant Persia. It meant the Middle East, okay? And it was absolute kings in their silks and their cushions and their harems, and the fans are waving and they're being fed grapes and all this stuff, okay? And the Greeks thought of themselves as tough, hard, used to hardship, but not girdly. All right, hate to put it that way, but that's what they would have said. We're not girdly men, like the Persians are. We're tough. And Herodotus sees this clash, right? Who's going to win? The namby-pamby Persians with their silks and their cushions, or the tough, hard Greeks? But yeah, eventually it was this kidnapping of Helen. And he says this funny thing. He says, "It is the way of sensible people to have no concern for abducted women. It is quite obvious that the women would not have been abducted if they had not been compliant." It's like, I don't know why people get so worked up when women get kidnapped. They wanted to go. Nobody's going to kidnap I beg to differ, Herodotus. I think you could kidnap a woman against her will. But the other translation we have in my house, the ones my kids read, says this: "Now as for the carrying off of women, it is the deed, they say, of a rogue. But to make a stir about such as are carried off, argues a man a fool." Doesn't have a lot of compassion. But yes, Asians, Paris, stole a Greek woman. And ever since then, the Asians and the Greeks just haven't gotten along. Okay. Let me read something on this page while I'm here. These are the stories told by the Persians and Phoenicians. Helen, Io, Europa, all these stories. I myself have no intention of affirming that these events occurred thus or otherwise, but I do know who was the first man to begin unjust acts against the Hellenes. Helen, Io, Europa, I really don't know. Were they real? Did it really happen? Don't know. But I'm going to tell you who really did do something.
What was that one you said?
Croesus. And then he says this: "I shall describe him, and then proceed with the rest of my story, recounting cities both lesser and greater. Since many, yes, he does. Since many of those that were great long ago have become inferior, and some that are great in my time were inferior before. And so resting my knowledge that human prosperity never remains constant." All right? We're going to see in this book lots of this. I'm on top of the world now, but I might not stay there. Which brings me to the question about Solon. A couple weeks ago I told you Solon is a historical Athenian person who redid their laws, and then everybody kept saying, Solon, why did you make this law? Will you change the law? He's like, I'm going on a long vacation for 10 years. You guys don't change the law for 10 years. I'm going traveling and see how it goes. And in his travels, supposedly, he visits Croesus, who is the king. I didn't get my maps out, but that's one of the reasons I wanted you to have this map. Hopefully you're reading enough and seeing the maps that you're getting a feel for it in Asia Minor. Okay, what's Turkey today that sticks out? And what lesson did Solon try to teach Croesus?
Happiness isn't declared by will.
Yes, and when do we declare happiness? Yeah, which seems kind of perverse, but that's exactly what he says. So Croesus takes Solon around. Hey, Solon, look at all my stuff. You ever see anybody happier than me? And Solon said, well, once upon a time, there's this priestess, and she, her ox or her horses or whatever were lame, and so her sons dragged her to the festival on a cart. And because she had such good sons, she was wonderful, and her sons were wonderful. And so she thanked the goddess, and she said, oh, goddess, give them a great reward. And so they just died. They just died right there before anything bad could happen to them at the height of their glory. And Croesus is like, I don't understand your story. And well, can you think of anyone else? Who's the second happiest person? Well, once upon a time I knew this Athenian guy, and he had a nice family, and he always had enough to eat, and he had a roof over his head, and he went off to war, and he died valiantly and bravely for his city. Croesus is like, you're a nut job, Solon. Look around. He says, yes, you're happy now. You're prosperous now, but perhaps you won't always be. We don't really know till the end of the story. Of course, Croesus thought he was a jerk and ignored him. So Croesus decides to attack Persia. I asked you, what motivates Croesus to attack the Persian Empire?
They were becoming strong.
Basically, they were becoming strong. There's not really a better answer to that. Do you have something to add, Mark?
No.
Okay. Yeah, it says that their power was growing, and he wondered if he would be able to check the Persian power before it became too strong. So, the famous story. He went to the oracle at Delphi. By the way, this is my art of the week. You guys have seen these pictures before. Actually, this is two pictures there. This is today, the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. This is what it looks like today. This is what's left of the temple itself. And then you go up a winding road because it's on the slopes of Mount Parnassus. And because it's too steep to just go straight up, And they have buildings, one of them still remains, and they're treasuries. The treasury of the Athenians is still there. It is where, in Herodotus you see people all the time dedicating gifts to the oracle at Apollo. And he made a golden tripod, and it weighed, 100 pounds, and he gave it to the oracle. He made a bowl of silver, and he made a statue, and he set it up for the oracle. They had buildings where each town that gave offerings, they stored the treasures. And then you go up farther, there's a stadium and there's a racetrack, but this is what it looks like today. He mentions once, Herodotus mentions a temple on the path there. This is the temple of Athena Pranaya. It's just about a mile up the road. So you would pass this if you were coming from Athens. You would walk past here first, and you might offer something to Athena before you head up to the temple of Apollo. And as you can see, I was blessed enough that that's one of the places we stopped when I went with Derek. So what did the oracle tell him? This was the next question. How does the oracle mislead him?
He said he would bring down a great nation.
If you attack the Persians, a mighty empire will fall. Poor Croesus did not send another messenger to say, which one would that be? Which one would that be? He's like, boom, a mighty empire will fall. Let's do it. Let's do it. And so, yeah, it did not work out like he thought. Eventually, he gets conquered. And Cyrus, the Persian, attacks him. Much to his surprise, of course, because he thought it was going to go the other way. And you probably remember this story. They've got him on a funeral pyre, like they're burning him to death. And he's going, "Oh, Solon! Oh, Solon!" Cyrus is like, what is he saying? Get him down here. I want to know what he's talking about. They get him down. They're stamping out the fire because the wood's already on fire, and they bring him down. He's like, "Oh, there's this Greek guy, and he told me that you never know if you're blessed and happy till the end, and that I was on top of the world, but then now here I am, and I'm conquered, and I'm going to be executed, and Solon was so right, and I was so wrong." And Cyrus was so impressed by this story, he said, "You know what, Croesus, we're just going to keep you alive. How would you like to travel with me and be my advisor?" Okay. Better than being burned alive? Better. So actually, for a long time throughout the book, we follow Croesus along giving advice. But so he says, "Hey, Cyrus, can I do something? Will you give me a favor?" Cyrus is like, "Yeah, what do you want to do?" "Well, these shackles that you've chained me up with, I want you to take them off, and I'm sending them to the oracle at Delphi. And I'm going to say, don't you feel bad about misleading your followers? Because I followed your advice, and guess what? This is what I got. Shackles." And so he did this, and they go complain to Apollo. And this is, okay, let me stop before I read what the Apollo says. Do you remember the beginning of the book? Very randomly, Herodotus said, right after that when you said Croesus, when you answered earlier, I know the first one to, subjugate the Hellenes. But first I have to tell you about his great-grandfather. What? And this is the story of the man who particularly thought his wife was beautiful, and he's like, "Hey, you should see her naked." And I'm like, "No, that's not right." He's like, "No, hide behind the door. It'll be fine." So he did, but she saw him, and she's very chill about it. And then the next day she says, "I know what you did. Now you're either going to commit suicide or kill the king. Your choice." He's like, "Well, I think I'll kill the king because, suicide. Not a fan." So he did, and he became king. He killed the king and usurped. So this is what the oracle says to Croesus. "Fated destiny is impossible to avoid even for a god. Croesus had to atone for the wrong of his ancestor 4 generations ago. This ancestor was a bodyguard for his king, of the family line of the Heraclids. He was induced by a trick involving a woman to kill his master and usurp for himself a position that did not belong to him. 4 generations later, his descendant, you got to pay. The bill is due." And so this is how Herodotus's mind operates, Like the story about great-grandpa is actually a part of the story for him because it affected what happened later. So, mentioned earlier, Herodotus said, "I will tell you about the first Asian who oppressed Greeks. He is Croesus." And we're like, so how did Croesus oppress Greeks? Do you remember that on the coast of Asia Minor, those were all Greek cities? Remember, the Greeks sent out colonies, and Croesus took them over. So in Herodotus' mind, this is the first Asian ruler who took over Greek cities. Does that kind of make sense? Okay. So, so these Greek cities send messages back home when Croesus is oppressing them. And they go to Sparta and they go to Athens and they say, "Hey, we're Greek too. Why don't you send us some help already? They're taking over our cities. It's not good. We don't have a good life anymore. You should send soldiers, and we could get rid of this guy." And so he goes to Athens, and we hear a long story about what's going on in Athens. I told you the story of this tyrant named Pisistratus a couple of weeks ago. And I asked you, by what trick did Pisistratus become tyrant of Athens for the first time, and then how did he do it for the 3rd time? Did you find that?
The first time he pretended he was wounded.
Okay, so the first time he beat himself up, like he hurt himself, and then he limps it to town and says, "Yeah, I got attacked on the road. Oh, I got some enemies. I think I need a bodyguard." So they give him a bodyguard, and he just gets more powerful from there. Because once you got a bodyguard, it's kind of hard to get at him. You know what I mean? You got guys protecting you. Do you remember what he did the third time? I love this one.
He just said, "Don't fear, go home." So he told them to don't fear, to go home. And they went home.
Okay, I don't think that's not the one I was thinking of. Okay,
Was it the second one?
maybe that was the second one. I,
Because the second one was when he got asked to marry someone's daughter.
yeah, no, but the third. Okay, so. Okay, first he wounded himself. Okay. After a little while. Say again, Mark.
The second one was with the fake Athena.
I think that was the third one. I thought that was the third one. Oh well. After a little while, okay. His rule. Okay, he lost it, and then the factions came back and they restored him. Oh yes, if he would marry his daughter.
So that was
Oh, that is the second one. I should change that. I'm sorry. Yeah. So they hired a lady, a 6 foot tall, beautiful lady. And they dressed her up like Athena and brought her in a chariot. And Herodotus says this. I love this. Pisistratus agreed, then in order to help him return to power, contrived the silliest scheme I've ever heard of. Particularly silly in this case, for long ago the Hellenes distinguished themselves from barbarians by their superior cleverness and freedom from naive stupidity. Moreover, they carried out this scheme against the Athenians, who were at the time reputed to surpass all other Hellenes in intellect. These are supposed to be the smartest guys in the world, and they dressed up some lady and marched her into town, and she said, "Athena is bringing Pisistratus back. Athena wants Pisistratus to rule." I'm like, okay, great, let's do that. Yeah. Yeah, I need to change that. How do you do it the second time? For future, thank you, guinea pig students with my reading guide. But the point being that Athens and Sparta both are involved with problems of their own. And they say, you know, we really don't have time to come help you over there in Asia Minor. You're going to have to deal with it yourselves. They're not going to keep giving that answer, but right now they're giving the answer. Okay. So, Croesus has been conquered. And then Herodotus decides to turn to Persia. He's told us the story of Croesus and Croesus' great-grandpa and all the Athenians and the Spartans. And now he says, now let's talk about Cyrus. And he goes back all the way back to Cyrus's birth. He can't just tell you just a little bit about the Persians. As you know, Herodotus never tells you just a little bit about anything, does he? Which is why this is a... And I asked you, what about Cyrus's birth and infancy sounds like other mythological stories that we're familiar with? What happened to Cyrus when he was a baby?
Child was trying to be killed because of prophecy.
How many times have we heard this? Like, we keep trying to kill. They tried to kill Paris. You know, they put him out in the woods because he was a firebrand that would burn down Troy. We just constantly hear stories. We're going to read a play about Oedipus. They put him out to get killed. Yeah.
What about when Jesus was born?
Yes. Do you know what? So, Moses. What about Moses? So, when I say mythological, there are stories that we know are absolutely true where something like this happened. I mean, I totally believe that Pharaoh was throwing baby Israelite boys in the Nile, and that his mother literally put him in a basket and floated him down the river in hoping that this would save his life. I totally believe Herod went and wiped out all, it says, under the age of 2, all the boys in Bethlehem and the surrounding area. But it connects those stories. How can I say this? Something bigger than this event is happening here. Does that make sense? Something bigger, something like God is stepping in. And so I don't know that this didn't happen to Cyrus. When I say mythological, I don't necessarily mean not true. Although that's the way we use it normally. When I say it's mythology, it's not true. But it means teaches you something about what's going on. But it does sound very familiar, doesn't it? Because we keep reading these stories about kids. And you know what? The sad thing is, because that's what they did in the ancient world. When you didn't want a baby, they threw it out to die. It's horrific. And Christianity came and changed that. And unfortunately, this is Mrs. Ferguson not being political. It's not political, it's moral. We've gone back to thinking it's acceptable to kill our unborn. It's the pagan, is what it is. This is the way the pagans behaved. Because as we know, there's not a whole lot of difference between killing a baby a few months before it's born and killing a baby a few months after it's born. So he's one of these babies. So the king's right-hand man, Harpagos, takes him. He doesn't want to do it. I don't want to kill the baby. It's so cute. So I'll give it to this shepherd guy. You kill the baby. And of course, his wife doesn't want to kill it. But they happen to have had a baby that died. And she's like, well, we'll just show him the body of our baby that died, and we'll raise this baby. And our baby's already dead. And they do. Of course, in these stories, it always comes out eventually, right? They always find out later, oh, it's you. You're the baby that we thought we killed. And so, but when it comes out, do you remember the story? And this is the next question. Why did Harpagos turn against the Medes and help Cyrus revolt? What is up with feeding people their children, too? What? Yes. So the king says, oh, so you didn't kill him. I thought I killed him. I gave him to him. It's his fault. He didn't kill him. Okay. Hey, you know what? Why don't you come to dinner tonight? I have some things I want to talk to you. Hey, send your son a little bit before dinner. I got some things I want to take care of with him, too. Okay. Not a good idea. But he says, like, do you know what you've just eaten? Yes, I do. And he sits on it, like the whole time. Cyrus goes off. His dad is a Mede, but his mom, no. His mom is a Mede, but his dad is a Persian. The Medes were in charge. The Persians were lower. They send him off to the Persians. But Harpagos is like, I'm getting back at you. You killed my son and you fed him to me. So he sends messages to Cyrus. Want to take over, Cyrus? I know it's your grandpa and everything, but he did want to kill you when you were a baby. So there's that. Why don't you come over and take over? I'll help you. I'm getting him good. And so he did so. So Cyrus became king of the Medes and the Persians. And if you read some books of the Bible, you will maybe remember the phrase, like the book of Esther, the book of Daniel in particular. They describe the laws of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be changed. That's why Daniel had to go to the lion's den. You might remember the story that the king made that law, and then he found out Daniel. He's like, but I like Daniel, but Daniel's a good guy. Yeah, but it's the laws of the Medes and the Persians which cannot be changed. In Esther, they made a law that they were going to kill all the Jews, till Esther flung herself at the king's feet and said, don't do it. He's like, yeah, but it's a law of the Medes and the Persians which cannot be changed. But I can let the Jews defend themselves. They can all grab a sword, and anybody who comes at them, they can take them out with impunity. These are the Medes and the Persians. There were two countries, and Cyrus is the one that brought them together. And then we hear about, the rest of book 1 is Cyrus's campaigns. We hear about Cyrus taking Babylon. Do you remember how he did it? I didn't ask you the question, but do you remember? Hint. Babylon was a city with a river flowing through the middle of it, and the river flowed in under the walls. Does this ring a bell? Does it ring a bell and then the clock rang? That's funny.
Well, he went through the river.
He went through the river. He diverted the channel he diverted part of the river upstream so that the river level would go down so his guys could get in. Herodotus tells the story, and Herodotus says, Babylon was so big that it took a couple of days for everybody to find out that they had been invaded. And also it wasn't helped by the fact that they were having a big festival at the time. They were celebrating a big feast. This is the feast where Belshazzar said, hey, how about if I bring the golden vessels from the temple in Jerusalem and drink out of them? And suddenly a big hand appeared and wrote on the wall, you have been weighed in the scales and found wanting. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. And it says that very night they took the city. It's the same event in the book of Daniel and in Herodotus. It's the same night. So he takes Babylon. He goes all the way to India, and he heads up north. And you might remember, he decides to attack some lady up there, some queen, and for no good reason at all. And she says, do you not have enough land to rule over already? Why don't you just stay where you are and I'll stay where I am? They go to battle and Cyrus is killed. But before he gets there, the last question I asked you was, Cyrus was angry with the Ganges River. How did he punish it? He couldn't get across this river. Yeah. He made it have a bunch of channels, like 360 channels or something. He's like, take that river. Now people can just walk across you. And I asked you, I have nothing to say to that attitude. The whole punishing natural features of the landscape is very odd to me. So what kind of person does this? Okay, crabby, mean, insane, at least very full of pride, at the very least. All right?
Wouldn't it have been easier to build a boat than make 360 channels if you couldn't even swim across?
You know what? You're not thinking like a king, Carter. Because the fun of punishing it just outweighs all else. So that's book one. Book one is the story of the Persians that came before the Persians who were going to attack Greece. And Asian people who started oppressing Greek cities. That's the whole point of it. Book two, we are going to whiz through. Much like maybe you did when you read it, if you read it, because a large portion of book two is weird information about Egypt. I just want to highlight a few things. But the first question I asked you is, who ruled the Persians after Cyrus died? Yes, Cambyses or Cambyses, you can say it either way. I'm going to say Cambyses just because that's how I'm used to saying it. Cyrus's son. And so he goes to, well, actually, the whole rest of book two is about Egypt. So let's just, because we only have like half an hour, let's just browse through these and see how many of them you found. What time marking scheme did the Egyptians originate? Yeah, the 12-month year. Excellent. So what do you think about flying snakes? Just to remind you, he says he went out in the desert with some Egyptian priests, and they showed him heaps of skeletons of flying serpents, and that they come in seasonally, and ibises are stationed there, and they eat the flying serpents. And I asked you to read about a couple of passages from Job. What did anybody put for this question? Did you get anything out of that? Did you do the Bible? Did you check in the Bible? All right. I know it's time for confession.
No.
Not literal confession, but I'm not going to absolve you of anything.
Does it have like some things like that?
Yes, so in the King James Version, there is an animal translated in that verse as unicorn.
Yes, there is unicorn in the Bible.
Yes, but in the NIV, in a more modern translation, I don't remember, they translate it ox or something like that. And so I guess the reason I asked this question is, what motivates a modern translator not to say unicorn? What? Okay, because they think it's childish, because they don't think they're real, right? So I'm translating the Bible. I don't want to put something that I don't think is real. Do they know that unicorns aren't real?
Well, it's blasphemy, because I mean, wouldn't the talking donkey not be real enough?
Exactly. The Bible is full of things that are not familiar to us. But the existence of an animal we don't know of wouldn't necessarily be miraculous. You know, they discover new animals all the time, like in the ocean that we didn't even know existed. New insect species and stuff like that. I don't know that there weren't things that we think of as unicorns and they're not extinct. Anyway, point being, I'm not going to belabor this because of time. We have an assumption, all of us sitting here in the modern world, that certain animals are real and certain animals are fairy tales, right? And winged serpents kind of falls in the fairy tale category for us. But my point is, Herodotus says he was taken out in the desert, and he specifically describes the terrain and the piles of skeletons, that he saw them with his own eyes. And I don't feel comfortable telling Herodotus he did not see that 2,400 years later. Do you see what I mean? And I guess I bring this up is because a lot of people say Herodotus is full of baloney. And Herodotus does say things that are not accurate. But I don't know necessarily that skeletons of winged serpents are one of them.
It's less scary than the huge snake that is like, yeah, that extinct. It's extinct. The huge snake.
No, I don't know. Am I gonna have nightmares tonight?
Yeah, like it's as big as like its circumference is like the futon size, I guess.
See, that sounds mythological to me.
It sounds creepy.
It is terrifying.
It's like as big of a snake as like the Megalodon as the shark.
So I vote, knowing the existence of snakes bigger than my futon, I vote that we cut Herodotus some slack about the winged serpents.
I mean, there were pterodactyls.
Exactly.
Made me think of dragon.
Yeah.
Yes,
Or like-
but see, people would say, oh, but if it's dinosaur related, it would have been extinct long before Herodotus. Well, that's your worldview. That's not necessarily true.
I hope that I hope that snake died. before
Well,
it had to be
maybe,
on the ark.
but he's very specific about it.
I hope that snake died before it had to be on the ark. That'd be scary.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh.
at its own level on the ark. That's why the ark had multiple levels, because one of them was. No, this is not true. Okay, moving on. The next question I asked you was, what does Herodotus believe was the true story of Helen in the Trojan War?
Troy, she was in Egypt.
You did read a lot of this, Mark. Good for you. Yeah, Herodotus says, what?
Is that funny?
So he says, the Egyptians that he talked to claimed that Helen, they got blown off course and they ended up in Egypt, and that the Egyptians that were there at the time said, this dude is kidnapping a woman. We are not going to let him do that. Lady, you can stay here and we'll get you back to your husband, and sir, you're going to have to go on without the woman because this is not acceptable to us. And he says, this is what the Egyptian priest said. And I agree with their argument, considering that if Helen had been in Troy, the Trojans would certainly have returned her to the Hellenes, whether Alexandros concurred or not. For neither Priam nor his kin would have been so demented that they would have willingly endangered their own persons, their children, and their city, just so that Paris could have Helen. Which is kind of what we talked about when we read the Iliad, didn't we? It's like, what kind of nutcases would keep her? Why would they not just give her back? Herodotus is saying, because they didn't have her. And they said they didn't have her, but the Greeks didn't believe them, and they attacked anyway. Well, that's an interesting take. There's actually a Greek play called Helen, very cleverly, and it's about Helen being in Egypt the whole time and not ever having gone, like a phantom Helen went to Troy, like an apparition of Helen. So in that case, they thought they had Helen, but they didn't really have Helen. Nothing to say about that. Okay, how was the Great Pyramid of Cheops built? One stone at a time. No, that's not the question.
Slaves, they only got breaks every 3 months,
Okay, so the reason I asked you this question, and I'm sorry, I'm going very rapidly, and this is the downside to having you read so much over break. It's like it's way too much to go over. I hate that. We need to have a 2-hour class after breaks. I'm not going to do that to you. What Mark said about slaves, using slaves, that was the viewpoint of archaeologists of Egyptian history for centuries after this. They used Herodotus. It's like Herodotus says that Cheops was a terrible king and a slave driver, and he just, he beat them and they built. But now archaeologists have done more research, and they actually think these guys were paid, that they weren't slave labor at all, that they were hired workers that worked in rotations. It was probably not aliens.
It probably was.
And so Herodotus had a big effect in this case on our view of history, because for all those centuries people thought, oh, Cheops, he was a mean guy. He beat all those slaves and he made them make his pyramid, and now they're thinking maybe not. Okay, so why is Herodotus writing this enormous chapter on Egypt? And you're like, yes, Mrs. Ferguson, that really is the question, isn't it? That, I think both of those are true, but the second one is the one that I was going for. It is about to be attacked. It is, Cambyses and Cyrus are on the Conquer the World tour. Next stop, Egypt, all right? Egypt, this is the place. So, at the very end of book 2, what? Oh, yes, thank goodness, they died before then. So, the reason let me start over again. So I gave you a writing assignment from this king of Egypt called Amasis, all right, that you're going to look up why he's good so that you can praise him. So at the very end of book 2, Herodotus gets us up to speed about who's on the throne in Egypt, all right? So he tells a story about a king, and there was a rebellion. And Amasis was the captain of his guard, all right? And he said, hey, Amasis, go out there with soldiers and deal with this rebellion. So Amasis marches out into the desert with the troops, and the rebels say, hey, Amasis, you're awesome. Why don't you be our leader? And you could rebel with us. He says, yeah, I'm in. So he joins the other side. And they march on the king that had actually sent him out in the first place, and he gets rid of the other king and he takes over the throne. And so book 3 starts this way. It was against this Amasis that Cambyses, son of Cyrus, was preparing to wage war. So see how Herodotus does? Like, here's the story. It's right in the middle. It's just a very straightforward story. But he does this. No, I need to tell you this. No, let's tell this side story, and then I come back to the main story. So all of book 2 is one of these big, let me tell you everything I know about Egypt and the way Amasis came to the throne. Now I'm back to the main story again. Does that make sense? And part of the challenge of reading Herodotus is he takes you on these over and over and over, and when you're out here, you forget. You forget the main story, right? So when that happens to you, remember right after the introduction, there's that chart that has all the topics, everything that's getting talked about in each section. So you can actually go here and say, okay, what were we talking about? Where were we going? Also, sometimes in the footnotes, the editor of this book very helpfully says, now Herodotus resumes the story that he stopped in, and it tells you the paragraph where he stopped the story and went out here. So if you whenever you see that, you could just glance at the footnote and you could go back. I do that sometimes when I read this. Like, what? Where were we? Oh yeah, I remember. Now I'm back at the main story. Okay, so, book 3. Why does Cambyses want to attack Egypt?
Was it when Amasis sent him away to place him for the person he was supposed to marry?
Yes. You know, one would think that in a normal history you'd say, because Egypt was full of treasure, because he wanted to be more powerful. No. For Herodotus, it's always personal. So once upon a time, Cyrus needed a doctor. Cyrus, Cambyses' dad. And Egyptian doctors are really good. And so the king, before Amasis took over, no, it was Amasis, sent his doctor. All right. Said, hey, you're a good doctor. Go live with the Persians. The doctor was not real thrilled with this because he had to be uprooted and move away from his home and family and go live with the Persians. So he got to the Persians. He's like, yeah, I'm ticked off and I'm going to get back at them. So he says, hey, King of Persia, Cyrus, you know what you really ought to do? You ought to just ask for Amasis's daughter so that you can marry her. And the doctor's thinking, take that, Amasis. You made me leave my home and family. Now your daughter's going to have to leave too. Take that. But Amasis doesn't want to send his daughter. So he takes the daughter of the king he deposed and he sends her instead and makes her pretend to be his daughter. So she hangs out with the Persians for a few months and she gets tired of being called Amasis's daughter all the time. And finally she says, hey, guess what? He's just back in Egypt laughing at you. I am so not his daughter. He didn't want to send his daughter to you. He sent me instead. I'm the former king's daughter, and he's probably having a good laugh right now at your expense. And Cyrus is like, oh, I'm going to get back. So Cambyses takes on this grudge, if you will, and he comes to attack Egypt. Cambyses gets to Egypt, and I asked you, why does Herodotus say that he suspects Cambyses is insane?
Those cows, the Egyptians they thought were a god, his brother and sister.
Random killing. Random killing.
He also married his sister.
Yeah, that's kind of nasty. But Egyptians did that all the time. So if you're going to like take over Egypt, it was kind of a Egyptian sort of thing to do, but it's still kind of nasty, yes.
I don't remember why I wrote this down, but I wrote down when he tried to overtake the king. But I don't remember.
Oh, I think it's because it wasn't a king, it was a messenger that he sent, and that's when he died, though. That's when he stabbed himself. That might have been what you were thinking. It says he was trying to overtake him and he jumped on his horse. So all of the above are right answers. Random killing of people. And so he went on an expedition against the Ethiopians, and it did not go well. And he came back, and everybody in Egypt was partying. And he's like, this is very offensive to me. You party when I have a defeat? And someone says, no, the god Apis has been born. He said, well, every once in a while, the god Apis is born. It's in the form of a calf. And it's a black calf with a white spot somewhere that I can't remember where it is, but we can identify it by that. He says, well, let me see this god Apis. So they bring in Apis, and he stabs it in the leg. And he says, you're a jerk god. I can stab your god in the leg. What a bunch of jerks the Egyptians are. And then the calf, I can just see its big eyes. And it crawls away in the corner, and it dies a couple of days later from its wound. But, and I'm skipping a question, I'm skipping down one. Eventually, though, he's off, he's chasing down this messenger, and it says, he leapt on his horse in a fit of exasperation at all his misfortune, intending to lead his army immediately. But as he jumped up, the tip of his sword's scabbard fell off, and the bare blade stabbed his thigh in the very same spot he had earlier struck Apis, the god of the Egyptians. Boom, that is poetic justice. He gets stabbed in the same spot because in Herodotus's world, when I had this quote, when I didn't read that for you guys. Yes, it was okay. I'm gonna have, because I don't have time to look it up. He says at one point, when great injustices are committed, the retribution of the gods is swift. And so it was a great injustice for him to do this, but He's out here telling you a side story, but remember the main story. When great injustices are committed, retribution of the gods is swift. Persia is going to attack Greece unjustly. Greece never did anything. Actually, they did do something, but Persia had no business attacking Greece in Herodotus' mind. And retribution from the gods came down. They're going to lose, and they're going to lose big. And so you see this over and over. You see people are up here, and then they're down, like Croesus. In fact, that's the question I skipped. Polycrates of Samos. Did anybody read about Polycrates? Did you read that part? What about him troubled Amasis? Do you remember that story?
He was doomed or something.
Yes. Why did he think he was doomed?
Like a prophecy.
You're close. He thought he was doomed because he was so doggone lucky. Everything he did turned out right. And Amasis said, Polycrates, no one ever stays on top forever. Right? The wheel of fortune spins. And so you need to do something that will be unfortunate to break the lucky spell, because the retribution of the gods is going to come on you, right? And so he said, you need to take something you really love and throw it away. It's something that'll make you sad. So he said, well, I really love this ring. So he went out on a boat and he threw it into the ocean. And he's like, oh, I really love that ring. Okay, that's my bad luck. Now I'm okay. And then somebody brings a fish to the palace that they'd caught a couple days later. They cut it open and the ring is inside. It came back to him. So he writes to Amasis in Egypt. He's like, well, I did what you said. I threw my ring away and then a fish ate it and it came back to me. And Amasis said, oh, buddy, when it happens, it's going to happen bad for you. I don't want to be your ally anymore. You're just too lucky. And so you're right, Mark. I mean, he felt like he was doomed, but he was doomed because you don't stay lucky forever. No one. So if you have a balance, if your life's like this, you know, a little bit of good, a little bit of bad on a regular basis. But Polycrates, he had good all the time. And Amasis said, buddy, that is not going to last. And I don't want to be there when it happens to you. I don't want to be your ally when it happens. And as a matter of fact, Herodotus then goes on to tell us the story of Polycrates and how he was deposed as tyrant of Samos. And he did come down eventually. Okay, so I told you how Cambyses died. He got stabbed in the thigh and his wound festered and got gangrenous or whatever and killed him. In the same place where he stabbed that poor calf with the big eyes. I can just see it. Then Herodotus decides to tell us about all the people that Cambyses ruled over and all the tribute they gave to him, you know, tribute in gold and silver. And he told us the story of how they gather Indian gold dust. How do the Indians get their gold to send as tribute?
They just ride on their camels with sacks and get it.
From whom?
Ants or something.
From. Now, in this desert of sand live huge ants, smaller than dogs but larger than foxes. Some of these ants were captured and brought to the Persian court. The ants in India make their dwellings underground by mounding up sand, just as ants do in Hellas, but this sand contains gold. So they go out with their camels, and they take the camels. Would you like a fly swatter? You don't need a fly swatter. I can do it with my bare hands. No, thank you. It was annoying me. They go out on their camels, and it says they ride up to the side of the gold, carrying sacks with them, which they fill with sand swiftly so they can begin their ride back again as quickly as possible. They do this, the Persians say, because the ants smell the men immediately, and once their presence is detected, they will pursue them. They also say these ants can move faster than anything, so that if the Indians did not get a head start on the return journey while the ants were still rallying for the chase, none of them would arrive home safely. What are these things?
I was kind of tired when I read this, and so before I reread it, I thought it was saying men were smelling other men.
Oh, okay. Yes, that is not. No, the ants can smell it. I can just see these enormous ants. Ants, dog-sized ants. Smell that? They're coming to get our gold. Let's get them, boys. I have no. Okay, so the winged serpents I'm okay with. The fox-sized ants, I have some difficulty believing, but, so, okay, let's get through our last couple of questions here. And then I'm going to give you some advice about reading, although read the whole thing if it's humanly possible without you doing damage to your health. No, don't do any damage to your health. So there is, oh, dang, we left out a bunch of stuff. Okay, so I got to go fast here. He killed his brother, Smerdis, right? Because he had a dream that Smerdis was going to be ruler. However, so he had Smerdis killed, but then one of the wise men back in Persia said, hey, nobody knows that the king's brother is dead. Hey, why don't you, my brother, who's also named Smerdis, pretend to be the king, and then we'll just take over. And so they just gave out Smerdis as king, but it wasn't the real Smerdis. It was a different Smerdis. So a group of guys got together and said, we're taking out the fake Smerdis. They found out he was a fake, and because he had no ears. And so 7 guys bound together, and they said, we're going to go take out the fake Smerdis. And they did. And then they said, which one of us should be king? One of them said, I don't want to be king. The other 6 said, let's have a contest. We're going to get on our horses in the morning and go for a ride. And the guy whose horse neighs first, you get to be king. And Darius, through a trick he arranged with the groom of his horse, arranged for his horse to neigh first. And Darius got to be the next king of Persia. We're actually going to skip a couple of the questions because we just are for time constraints. I need to delete some of these questions. But the more important question is the last one. Darius continued the family tradition of the Conquer the World tour. And but he started thinking about Greece. Do you remember, what did you write for that very last question? Why did Darius start thinking about attacking Greece?
Did they ever start trying to control this country?
Not yet. They haven't really done anything yet. Yes. So it's another one of these very personal stories. You know what I mean? It's not grand political affairs. It's just some people's grudges. So there was a guy who was living in Croesus's kingdom. And when he was Greek, and he was a doctor, he had been apparently enslaved in some fashion and taken to Croesus. When Croesus got taken over, this poor guy got taken to Persia. And it just so happened that that Darius got sick, and this Greek treated him. And then Darius's wife, Atassa, also got sick. And he treated her successfully. And she said, what would you like? I should give you a reward. You're a really good doctor. What do you want? And he said, well, what I really want is to go home. So here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to convince your husband to attack Greece. And before he does it, he will send spies out. And I will volunteer to be the leader of the spies, since I'm Greek. And I will run away when we get there, and I will go home. Everyone previously this week asked me, why didn't he just ask for his freedom? I cannot answer this question. All right. Here's what I would like you to do this week. I want you to write the Crea. Tell me all about, you must relax a bow when you are not using it. You don't want to keep it bent and stretched tight all the time. And then we're going to read books 4 and 5. Now, book 5 is considerably shorter. Book 4 is kind of longish. But here's the Conquer the World tour. Now is on the way to Thrace and Scythia. These are places up north of the Black Sea. And I will tell you already, book 4, I wrote this down when I was reading last night and I couldn't sleep. Paragraph 2 through 82 in book 4 are all about the habits and customs of the Scythians. 2 through 82. It is the least important part that I am assigning to you. how I think this is all very doable for you guys to read both books, okay? And I will already tell you, in that section is the merry-go-round of death. There's also pot smoking. So if there's lots of, and there's stripping people's skin off and using them as chairs, and like cutting off their heads and gilding their skulls and using them as drinking cups. You're going to miss all of that if you don't read 2 through 82.
Why would you recommend we don't read this?
Yeah.
But it's not important for the main story. Do you know what I mean? It's one of these long, but the reason is because Darius is going to attack Scythia.
What's the
No.
specific time where it comes, like what paragraph is usual?
Yeah, you have to find it now.
Yeah, I'm not going to tell you.
Yeah, you have to read all of it.
Um,
and that.
Okay, so I should let you guys, I think I heard cars, so I don't want to keep your parents waiting. I feel like your mom's going to start getting mad at me, you and Mark and Lizzie, because I'm always late.